want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot 'em my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stay down, never switched up.
Hey everyone, you guys know what time it is. It is time for me to share yet another sew along with you guys. But this one is part of Hackathon that's going on for the month of July, hosted by my girl Kris from Unsocial. So let me tell you what we are doing today. Now I have mentioned this several times before in terms of pattern, but the first thing I need you to do is, if you don't have it, run over to Simplicityh and put it in your cart for the next sale. Okay. Now, my partner is the lovely Candace, or AKA C from We See Style. So she will have a hack for you as well. So what I am doing, I'm going to take this cami. The pattern that I am using is Butterick 7001. I'm going to hack this into a dress, but then I also have some other things that I'm going to be doing. Now, you may see just the dress, but you also may see another hack that I'm thinking of doing with this cami as well. Now, this one is only 3 pattern pieces, pattern piece number 6, 7, and 8. Yes, I traced the pattern, the sides that I need, because I'm going to make some hacks, number 1. Number 2, because my pattern is actually a PDF pattern, I had to glue it together and tape on high areas. I don't want to do that all again. So I went ahead, grabbed some tracing paper. Yes, I have a lot of tracing paper. I get this from Amazon. I have like 10 rolls of this, okay? I will put that in the description box below if you are interested in the tracing paper that I use. Okay, so if you have this pattern, or you can watch the video and then tune in when you have this pattern to do these hacks, okay? So the first thing you need to do is grab pattern piece number 6, 7, and 8, 3 pattern pieces in and out the door, super simple. Now, I would say first, test it with some muslin to make sure you have a good fit just for the cami before you go into making any hacks, okay? So the first hack that I'm going to do is not necessarily a hack, but listen, I won't say that I have big tatas, but I'm gonna say when you're a 41D for a bra cuff, we definitely need a shelf bra, okay? Not chef, shelf, something for that, you know, your boobs to sit up on, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is draft a shelf bra. That's the first thing I'm gonna do. Second thing I'm gonna do, well, for this one, I'm just gonna tell you. Now my shoulder strap says cut 2. I'm gonna cut 4 because I want ties instead of a strap that's gonna go all the way around my shoulder like this. Instead, it's gonna be straps instead of ties instead of the shoulder strap, okay? Now, this right here is your facing. You should be cutting 2 of fabric, 2 of inner facing. So, in terms of pattern piece, once again, you need pattern piece number 6, which is the front and back. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Pattern piece number 7, which are your shoulder straps. If you are doing just a shoulder strap, you need to cut 2. But if you're doing what I'm doing and creating ties to go on the shoulder to where you can adjust how you choose, I would definitely say cut 4. And the last pattern piece that you need is pattern piece number 8, which is your front and back facing. You need to cut 2 of fabric and also interface 2. All right, so now that I showed you that, let me move this out the way and let's start constructing our shelf bra. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so let's go ahead and create our shelf bra. Now, you may and may not have done this before. I have done this several times with the last cami. I actually did this with the last 2 camis that I did. And one thing that I noticed about my camis that I have so many of them. I have over 11 camis and about 3 or 4 of them have the shelf bra, okay, for it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to take my tape measure, and I have a complete video of the sewing toolkit that you will need for any of my sew alongs. The only thing that changes is the notions used. But here's the thing with this one, you don't need any notions, okay? So there's no notions for this. It's just basically thread, okay? And your fabric of choice. And I'll share the fabric with you when we get into the sewing. So the first thing I have are my notches on both sides. The first thing you want to do is go up 1 inch from that notch. I have already done this, but go 1 inch up from that notch. And I'm going to make a dot. That's my dot right here. Do the same thing on the other side. You're going to move up 1 inch and make a dot. All right. Now, from that dot, I am going to go down 5 inches. And it should meet up where your notch is on the side seam, okay? So just mark your 5 inches, okay? And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side from the dot. Make sure you are marking 5 inches from the dot where you created that dot, okay? Now grab your ruler. And then what you want to do is make a straight line all the way across. So it should be from notch to notch. But if your notches are different or you cut a different size, it may not go from notch to notch. Just FYI, I am cutting a size 18. Cut whatever size your pattern piece, for whatever pattern piece. All right, so this is my line right here where you see the cut to. This is my line right here, okay? Don't worry about the lines that's up here because I did something else with it for a different hat. So this line right here where my notches are is the line that I'm talking about. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is determine what size elastic you want to use. Now, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch elastic for my shelf bra. Okay, so with that being said, I need to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to encase that elastic into. So let me grab my see-through ruler and I'm going to create a 1/2 inch seam allowance underneath. Now, if you are using 3/4, make it 3/4. If you are using 1 inch elastic, make it 1 inch. Use whatever's in your stash, okay? So I'm just going to create a 1/2 inch because I have a lot of 1/2 inch elastic. So that's what I'm going to use from my stash instead of going to Joann's and purchasing some, okay? So I'm just going to go all the way across using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, make sure your line is pretty darn straight. All right, so I'm just going to write 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right. Now, if you are doing just the cami, you could go ahead and cut it around. But what I'm going to do is now grab a sheet of paper and I'm just going to trace out my shelf bra. And basically, it's just basically the top, the sides, and around where you added that seam allowance. So I'm just going to definitely take and put my pattern weights down. And I'm just going to trace all the way around. All right. So go ahead and trace around your pattern piece now. After you completely trace your pattern, the next thing you want to do is definitely label it. Now I'm just going to rewrite everything from the pattern and then just make sure I label this shelf bra. Okay, so this was Butterick 7001 and then I'm just going to write shelf bra cut 1. Because it's just going to go around the front of your body. Also, make sure you transfer your grain line. And then what you want to do, I'm going to definitely make sure I put seam allowance a 1/2 inch. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut that out. So if you are just doing the cami, go ahead and cut this out. And once you cut that out, put it off to the side before we could just do our cami. Now I'm going to be doing a hack for a slip dress. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what I'm going to do for the hack for the slip dress. So let's go ahead and move this off to the side so we can start doing the hack. All right, so let's go ahead and start the hack for the slip dress, okay, that I'm gonna be making. Now, for me, I'm gonna make my slip dress about 36 to 37 inches from my shoulder down to where I want it, which is right at the knees. It's about 37 inches. I'm only 5'6", so I want mine pretty much to my knees, and I think that's gonna be a good look for myself. So what I did is I folded my paper in half, wrong sides together on the paper, okay? And it gave me my center front. So I'm just gonna write center front here. And what you wanna do is go ahead and roll out a sheet of paper. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your paper. Now I'm gonna roll out quite a bit because there's gonna be another pattern that's gonna attach to this to make my dress. So let me roll out some more paper. Now what I want to do is make sure that I am measuring my paper out at least about 40 inches. And then that way I know that I have enough room to work with. Okay, so I have my pattern piece at about 44 inches. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim it. Then that way I don't have to have this roll. All right. All right. So I trimmed my paper down. So I'm just going to kind of fold this up so I could kind of have quite a bit of space to work with. So I'm just going to fold that up for right now. And then what I'm going to do is just work with the bodice for right now. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this. This is supposed to be the fold of my paper. So what you really want to do is definitely fold your paper in half. Now I have not, but my paper is extremely long. You want this to be folded on the fold of your fabric. Now I'm just going to kind of, well, let me just go ahead and fold it so you get a good idea of what you're going to be doing. But I need an extra long piece of paper in order to do this. Okay, so I'm going to have to definitely do pieces together. All right. So go ahead and fold your paper in half now. All right, so now that I went ahead and got a long sheet of paper, now one thing I'm gonna tell you is my tracing paper wasn't long enough, so I had to go ahead and piece two pieces together with some shipping tape. Do whatever it is that you need to do, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and trace around the neck, the shoulder, the underarm, all the way down to the waistline. Just the front pattern piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and trace now. After you trace your front pattern piece all the way to the waistline, go ahead and remove that, but make sure you transfer all your dots and your notches. So I'm just gonna open my pattern piece up and make sure I transfer the dot and the notch. And also make sure you transfer this grain line as well. Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this line back to the front. Okay, so I know this is my waistline, so I'm just going to write waistline on it. So I'm just going to transfer over to a pen instead of a marker. I'm only using a marker so you are able to see this. Now I'm going to go ahead and transfer my grain line as well. All right, so that is my grain line. Now the next thing I'm going to do, you could get any type of pencil skirt pattern, okay? Now the pattern that I'm gonna be using is Simplicityh 9375. I made this skirt back in October 2022. I cut a size 20, so I'm gonna use the same size because it's pretty much the same thing. I still have the skirt. I tried it on. It still works beautifully, okay, for what I'm gonna do. So what you wanna do is find a pencil skirt pattern that you have tried and it fits perfectly to put towards the bottom to draft for the slip dress. Now, if you have this pattern, I would say use this pattern, but you could use any pencil skirt pattern of your choosing, okay? Now go ahead, I'm gonna go ahead and do the front. So I'm gonna show you the front pattern piece just like this. And now this is a cut one, but I had to fold it at the center front, okay? Because of course, once again, you're gonna put it on the fold of your paper. So I'm just gonna scoot the paper up a little bit so you're able to see it underneath the camera. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to place it on the fold of the paper as well, okay? Now, what you're going to do is make sure that the hip line is basically squared off with your waistline. So the side seam of your hip line needs to be square. Now, I'm gonna tell you this, it's not going to match up perfectly, and that's perfectly fine. But what you wanna make sure is that that hip line, now I'm gonna open it out so you can kind of see it, but I folded it in half, so I know this fold needs to go as close to the fold line of my pattern, my paper. So I have this center front on the fold line, and I'm gonna make sure that this line right here, where the waist is, it's on that line, okay? So actually the waistline is right here, so I'm gonna move it up and make sure that it's with the waistline. But you wanna make sure that center front line is where the center front is. So what I'm gonna do is make sure that that line is matched up. Now, it's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance from the top to the waistline on this pattern. I want to keep that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance because my hem allowance is 5/8 of an inch as well. So once I remove 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, it's going to give me right at 36 inches that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this line right here, which is my waistline actually, but the pattern is basically squared off with that waistline. So I'm gonna put my pattern weights there and try to line it up as much as possible if you can. Okay. Try to make sure that that center front line is matched up with the front. Now it may be a little shorter, but definitely make sure that waistline, that curve is curving on that waistline, okay? So let me put a little bit more pattern weights down. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm not worried about darts or anything that's on the pattern. The only thing I'm gonna do is trace out the shape of the skirt, okay? If you did a different pattern, definitely you just wanna trace out the shape of the skirt, all right? So go ahead and trace out the side seam of your skirt now. All right, so after you do that, now if you want pockets, definitely transfer the dots for your pockets if you want to put pockets on your slip dress. Now me personally, I don't want pockets on the side of my slip dress, to be honest with you. Not this time around for the fabric that I'm using, but maybe if it was something a little bit darker, all right? So now I still have a little bit left to trace, but I'm just gonna use my straight ruler to do that. So let me go ahead and pick this up. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna finish tracing this line to make it straight, basically. All right, so now this is my line for my pencil skirt. Now, the next thing I want you to do is measure from your waist to your hip line. So what I'm gonna do, you might want your ruler. It's about 6 inches for me, but I'm gonna grab my tape measure. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure from the waistline to the hip line. And like I mentioned, it's about 5 3/4. So I'm just gonna write 5. You're gonna need this for later. So I'm gonna put a notch at my waist and a notch at my hip. And now you have your pattern. Now I know this is, I'm gonna put Butterick. Well, first of all, I'm gonna cut it out and then I'm gonna write on it. So let me cut it out first. All right, so now this is your pattern and you could transfer the same thing over to the other side, but this becomes your pattern. And what you're gonna write on this pattern, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take notes of the patterns that I use. So I'm gonna put Butterick So I'm gonna write this in marker just so you can see it, but then I'm gonna trace over it with a pen. Butterick 7001 slip dress hack. Or you could write Cami into slip dress. And then you could write right here, it's the skirt of Simplicityh 9375. All right. So actually for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 1 instead of 2 because the back of the skirt for Simplicityh 9375 is a little different. Now, if you have a skirt pattern that's front and back is the same, you can just cut 2. But for me, I have to cut 1. So I'm just going to write cut 1 of fabric. Okay. Now, you're going to pretty much do the same thing for the back with a couple of minor hacks as well, things that you're going to do. So move this off to the side, grab some more sheet of paper. If you need to tape it like I did, go ahead and do so. And then I'm going to show you how you do the back pattern piece now. All right, so now it's time for the back pattern piece. If you are using Simplicityh 9375, you will know that there is a zipper that needs to go in the back, but we're going to remove that. So I'm going to go ahead and fold and press in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance because that's what the zipper would be installed at as, 5/8. So I'm going to press it all the way down to get rid of that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance in the center back of my pattern piece, okay? So if you have a zipper for your back pattern piece, that's the center back zipper, go ahead and press in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance where the center back seam is now. All right, so what I did, I went ahead and traced the cami bodice once again. It's the same pattern for the front and the back. So I went ahead and did that. So the next thing I'm gonna do is pretty much the same thing that I did before. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trace. Now remind you that on the front, I told you to write down how far it was from the waist to the hip line, okay? Mine came out as 5 3/4. So you wanna check and make sure yours says the same thing. So go ahead and measure from the waist down to that hip line with your measuring tape. So I'm gonna go from here to here, and mine is the same. So what you want to do is definitely, I'm gonna make sure that mine is definitely touching that line just like that. And make sure that it's 5 3/4 for me. Do whatever it is for you. That's just my measurement. Now, remind you that I have my seam allowance folded in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance only because there is a zipper and I don't need that zipper. Otherwise, it's going to be 5/8 of an inch too big at the hip area. Am I against it? Absolutely not. But I don't want 5/8 plus 5/8 for the front, which is 1 1/4, and then another 1 1/4 added at the hips. You get what I'm saying? So I would be adding 2.5 inches to the hips that I don't need, okay, for this so-called pencil skirt slash slip dress. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and trace like I did the front. I'm going to trace all the way down to the hips, and I'm going to also mark the hips, and then I'm just going to trace all the way down and at the hemline as well, okay? So just go ahead and do the same thing that you did for the front now. All right, so I have it traced the way that I want. I'm going to go ahead and remove my pattern weights. Actually, I'm going to keep my pattern weights, but move my pattern piece. And then I'm going to take my ruler and close out the bottom hemline and this side seam right here. Now what I'm gonna do is go ahead and label it like I did for the front, and I'm also gonna put a notch right here. Now what you wanna do is use your hip curve ruler to curve it out because you do not want any sharp edges. So grab your hip curve ruler and curve out this line for both the front and the back. Make sure you mark all of your notches, your dots, because you should have dots at your top portion. Let me scoot it down so you're able to see it. So I'm gonna go in and make sure I mark my circles that's at the shoulder area for my ties as well. I'm gonna go ahead and label it and then cut it out, all right? So go ahead and make those adjustments now, and I'll show you what's next. All right, so now that I have changed up the curve with this is my SA curve ruler. You can no longer get this, so use a hip curve ruler, and then go ahead and cut it out, and then definitely make sure that it match up at the front and the back. If you use the same pattern, it should match up at both the front and the back. Make sure that it's pretty much match up front and back. The only difference would be the back, of course, than your front because you use the back skirt piece. Make sure that the lengths are the same for sure. And then cut it out of fabric. You're gonna be cutting one of the front, one of the back as well. All right, so go ahead and do that now.
I'm in the zone now. Nothing can change what we on now. When I pull up, know it's going down. Foot on the gas, ain't no slowing down. Aiming for greatness, no settling. Kick down the doors, they won't let me in. Taking no L's, yeah, I gotta win. Watch me kick down the doors, they won't let me in. Who running the game now? Foot on the gas, can slow down. No, my team, we holding it down. We know we running it now. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change, yeah.